Welcome back to D1 Extra. I'm Kristen Eargle. As Delaware has an open AD chair, we bring in Kevin Tresolini with News Journal and Delaware Online. You're a columnist, writer, and you've seen a decade of transformation and more. Having talked offline, you've been a part of that community and newspaper for 43 and a half years. I feel like I could do a whole segment on that. But you've seen Delaware move into FBS and Conference USA. When you look at this from your unique perspective, front row chair, what are the most important leadership qualities that Delaware should seek in the new AD and meet the demands that will be in FBS?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see, Kristen, how this all evolves. For the University of Delaware, they have an opening at president. Dennis Assanis, the president, is stepping down at the end of June. So then they'll have a search for a new president. And it's my understanding that the search for a new athletic director or the national search for a new athletic director will probably not commence until after a new president is in place. And who knows when that could be? It could be a year from now. Those things, as we know in the college world, take a long time. But Delaware is fortunate in that its interim athletic director, Jordan Skolnick, was Chrissy Raywak's right-hand man, her co-pilot, ever since she came to Delaware from Michigan in 2016. When she stepped down to take the USA swimming job, which of course later fell through, back in the late winter, Jordan was elevated to the interim athletic director position. And I think Delaware is very fortunate in what is obviously a very transitional time at the University of Delaware, but in all of college sports because of the House settlement. They have somebody who's been there and who's kind of been directing whatever they do really for the last 8 years as the top assistant to the athletic director. So it's going to be interesting to see. I expect he'll be in charge, for a while, at least until the new president comes in, and maybe they'll even decide then that he should shed the interim tag and become full-time athletic director. Time will tell.
The transition to Conference USA and FBS football is a major shift for Delaware. What do you see as the immediate priorities to ensure a smooth transition?
Well, they have to have a better team. They got to get some better players. That's the main thing. Delaware is actually fortunate in that as an FCS program, Delaware has long had one of the larger budgets. It has supported football at a higher economic level than a lot of its peers in FCS. So its transition into Conference USA and the football bowl subdivision is not really a major alteration. Delaware already has an athletic budget that is bigger than most of the schools in Conference USA, with Liberty being the main exception. Right. As we all know, Liberty is a pretty unique place, and has access to it seems almost unlimited funds to support its athletic programs. So Delaware's not going to beat out Liberty in terms of what it has in terms of its athletic budget. However, it has a bigger athletic budget and has spent more money on athletics than really just about all the other teams that it will be joining in Conference USA. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to be a challenge. I wrote a story this week, that I think, even though football is the only sport in which Division I is split into two categories, FCS and FBS, I think Delaware is actually closer to being competitive in football than it might be in some other sports, men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball, all those outdoor sports where Southern schools really benefit, tennis, golf, track and field, things like that. I think they might have a tougher time in some of those sports than they will in football, even though, again, football is the one that's actually climbing to a higher level.
The past several years, Delaware has seen major facility updates, academic success, competitive achievements. How do you see a new AD, or in the interim period, perhaps over the next year, maintaining the momentum that we have seen from Delaware?
Yeah, that's a good word for it, Kristen. They really do have some nice momentum going. Chrissy Raywack did a lot of positive things with Jordan, again, as her right hand man during her stint as athletic director. Most notably was a $65 million improvement to the football stadium, and it's attached Whitney Athletic Center, which houses athletic training, weightlifting, medical, student support, all kinds of things. They do have plans for even more expensive upgrades. They would like to enclose the north end of Delaware Stadium and attach it to a new indoor office and practice and locker room facility. That's been talked about now for about 4 years. They really haven't even gone public with it yet, because I think things have kind of been slowed down by the move up to FBS, which costs some money, and just all the changes that are happening in college sports with the House settlement, with NIL, with revenue sharing. That money is kind of being steered in some new ways now, that when all the talk about building this new $85 million athletic facility first began 3 or 4 years ago, some of this stuff hadn't really been envisioned yet. So money's kind of going to other places, including the pockets of the student athletes. And, it's kind of altered some of the facility upgrades that they've talked about.
With so many facility upgrades and all the money you talked about generating the last few years, where have they found those resources?
Yeah, they've done a good job of tapping into kind of both extremes that you need when you're doing those projects. They've been able to kind of hook up with some alums who've done well in various walks of life, who have been able to give them the large chunks of financial assistance you need. The new building attached to Delaware Stadium is called the Whitney Center, named after a man, Ken Whitney, who graduated from Delaware in 1980, was on the golf team and went on to great success in a couple different lines of work. They've also done a nice job of, obviously being a professional athlete these days is very lucrative, has become much more lucrative in the past, 5, 10, 15 years. They've done a nice job of touching base and connecting with former football players like Joe Flacco and Nasir Adderley, who spent a few years in the NFL, and Bilal Nichols, who's in the NFL now, a defensive lineman. They've done a nice job of securing financial support from people like those guys who've just got a strong, passionate feeling from the time that they spent here and a strong connection to the university. And then, you can't obviously rely just on those big projects. They've done a nice job of tapping into fans, community members, alums, to kind of, build up the rest of that. Obviously that's much smaller contributions. It's, it might be $1,000 instead of $1 million. But they've gotten enough of that stuff, that they were able to, do the $65 million stadium project. And it was far more than they had ever raised for any kind of athletic facility, tapping into both big donors and small donors from the community and from the alumni base. So that's just going to have to continue and grow, really, because of the increasing costs that are coming with college sports now, because you got to pay the athletes.
And let's expound on that a little bit more. You brought up the House settlement, rev share, NIL, some of the things that are on the table that all the ADs across the country are facing. For the new AD coming in, what are some of those significant challenges that will be on their plate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, like the challenge is going to be everywhere. You got to make money. You got to make money because you're now sharing it, with your student athletes. I think that will be the big challenge. Delaware already has a plan in place for the changes that are coming, in terms of the larger scholarship. The larger scholarship numbers, the altered roster numbers. They already have a plan in place, and again, that's where they benefit from having some experienced astute leadership. they do have a plan ready to unleash when all this finally ultimately gets decided. They haven't made it public, in terms of like, okay, we're going to give this many baseball scholarships, we're going to give this many men's lacrosse scholarships. But they have pledged to continue to, do whatever they can to keep these teams strong and competitive, especially with the challenges that they now have coming. 14 of Delaware's 22 sports are going to Conference USA. 7 of the other 8 also have new conference affiliations coming that will, again, just like Conference USA, include some competitive challenges that they're going to have to be up for.
If you could give one piece of advice to the search committee, what would it be and why?
Well, I think they have to understand that athletics are important at the University of Delaware and have really kind of become even more important in recent years with some of those facility upgrades. When I entered Delaware as a student many years ago, as a high school kid from Pennsylvania, it was viewed as a small public institution from a small state, and I think that small state mentality often kind of undermined Delaware a little bit, in terms of how it thought when it came to its status, both athletically and academically. But that has grown to high levels. This is one of the better public institutions academically in the country. It's in a beautiful college town of Newark. It's right off Interstate 95 in the most heavily populated area of the country. So I think that they've seen that the school had room to grow academically and athletically and kind of take on greater national status. And in their decision to move up to the Football Bowl subdivision and join Conference USA, which, as you know, is just a vast geographic spread from New Mexico to Florida up here to Delaware, I think they viewed that as another step in kind of giving the University of Delaware some greater national stature. It's typically for years had students from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, a few from New York, a few from Virginia, but that's going to change because, people in Texas and Louisiana and Florida and New Mexico and Kentucky are going to be watching Delaware games on TV and seeing pictures of their campus and saying, hey, that might not be a bad place to go to school. Let's check it out. So I think its scope is about to significantly increase, and whoever does become the athletic director, whether it's Mr. Skolnick continuing in that post or someone coming from outside, they need to recognize that this is going to be where Delaware belongs in a larger national profile, athletically and academically, and the athletic director needs to do whatever they can to keep the funds coming and continue to drive and lead those athletic programs toward national and conference success.
And for a timeline, you mentioned it earlier, you do not anticipate them making a decision until the president is hired.
That's Kristen, that's my understanding. And I think that's kind of typical.
Sure.
That's what happened actually with the last athletic director hire. President Assanis came in as in the spring of 2016 as the new university president. There had been an interim AD in place for a while there, and when he came in, he hired the new athletic director. And I'm assuming that's what will happen again. Again, the difference is, this time there is an interim athletic director in place who will have a strong, I think, a strong opportunity to continue in the post on a full-time basis just because of his background. But again, that'll be up to whoever does come in, and maybe that new president will have some strong feelings about people who could provide the right athletic leadership that the University of Delaware needs, especially, as it's making, the challenging climb to FBS and handling all the increased expenses and things you have to pay attention to in the new world that is going to be college sports.
Final question for you, Kevin. Where do you see a great leader taking Delaware?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, Kristen. I think Delaware needs to be better in a lot of sports. They're leaving the Coastal Athletic Association, where they spent 25 years and had some absolutely incredible, wonderful successes. Women's basketball during the time Elena Del Don was there. The volleyball team went to 5 NCAA tournaments. The men's lacrosse team went to the Final Four. They had some great successes. They need to have more. They need to be better at the levels that they're going to and the leagues that they're going to than they've been in the CAA. And it's going to be hard because these are all pretty much across the board tougher, more challenging conferences competitively than where they've been. So the University of Delaware is going to need some very, very astute leadership and knowledge to get the right people in place, coaches who can hire good enough or coaches who can recruit good enough players to obtain and sustain those better competitive levels of victorious success, because good things happen when you win economically and in a lot of other ways. And they need to win more. I really think they need to win more than they've won in their quarter century in the CAA.
Kevin, we really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Kristen, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.